Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to my brand new studio. Well, it may not look like a studio right now, but it will soon. I've just got a box or two in the way. So here's the story. Last summer, my wife and I bought a house. It was a bit of a fixer-upper, and I had to dedicate 8 months to the renovation. But the house did come with this. It's a relatively new 10-foot by 24-foot storage shed, and I'm planning to convert it into my dream video studio. Step 1 was to clear out some boxes and record a video in the shed to get a feel for the space. I now have a plan together, and I'm ready to start working. So let's jump back to the shed, and I'll show you what I'm starting with. Clearly, as you can see, the walls are not finished yet. There's no insulation, no drywall, so all that still has to be done. But the upside to that is that instead of it being done with just basic materials, I get to pick and choose what I'm going to use for the insulation and drywall to make it a little bit more soundproof. As I realized when I did my first test video in here, there are neighbor kids and dogs and buses, and I'm going to need a little extra soundproofing. Also, another thing I'm going to have to do is electrical. They've already run electrical to the shed. There is a little sub panel over here that's run 60 amps off the main panel inside, and they've even already installed a couple of outlets here, but whoever did it did a pretty sloppy job because the outlets are like placed at random heights, and clearly they did a pretty sloppy wiring job. So I'm just going to take all of that out and start from scratch with the electrical in here so that I can know that it's done correctly, and I can place the outlets exactly where I think they'll be the best fit for me. So that is what I have to do. If you do any type of DIY projects and you don't already have a self-leveling laser level, I would highly recommend that you get one. And they're not terribly expensive either. I want to say I got this one for around $125, but I bought this one right before I started the whole home renovation, and I had a feeling it would be useful here and there, but I ended up using it almost every day of the renovation because it's not just for making sure that things are level. Anytime you need to make sure that things are in line or just in a straight row, it's really useful. So it's helpful for things like making sure that all of my outlets in the ceiling are in a straight line. Well, it is about 6:30 a.m., which is the time that I would typically start work at my day job, and instead I'm starting working on the studio. I specifically requested off 2 days of PTO so that I can finally make a little more progress on getting this thing finished out. I had to take a couple of months away from working on the studio. I'll talk about all of that in a different video. But once I finally had a couple of days here and there to start working on it again, you know, when I'm filming videos and trying to work on stuff, things just take twice as long, and I wanted to finally see some progress. So I did a little work in here without recording anything, so please forgive me for that, but I figured this is a good time to do an update. If I remember correctly with where I left off when I was recording a couple of months ago, I was in the process of roughing in the electrical, and after that is when I started on insulation. What I wanted to use for insulation was rock wool because it's a slightly higher R value, a little bit better thermal resistance than regular fiberglass insulation. but then it's also a lot more soundproof. One of the issues that I've run into here, being that this is a shed and not a house, is there is no consistency with the stud locations. So instead of studs being on 16-inch centers or 24-inch centers, these are almost all wider than 16-inch, but some are like 17, some are 21, some are 20. It's all over the place. So I knew I was going to have to be cutting a lot of insulation to make it fit. I'm covering the ceiling with this fabric. This is actually landscaping fabric, and I'm using 2 layers of that just because one layer was very see-through. You could still clearly see all the studs and the insulation. 2 layers seems to do the trick. So I'm going to cover the whole thing in that fabric, and then I'm going to do a slat ceiling. So I have these 1x4 common boards. I have 1 row of that fabric and 1 board on the ceiling just as a proof of concept. I wanted to make sure that's going to work out the way that I want it to before I move forward with anything else. So now that that's done, I'm jumping back onto drywalling the side walls. The wall behind the camera is done. This side wall is almost completed, 1 board remaining there, and what I'm actually in the process of doing right now is finishing the drywall on this wall. I have an extension cord running through there at the moment. You can see there's 1 little section between the studs there that's not completed, and closing that in is going to force me to at least temporarily wire up a few of the receptacles in here so that I have a power source. So that is where you're jumping in. You are now up to speed. Let's get some work done. If you've installed drywall before, you may notice that I'm installing this in a little bit of a weird order. So typically the way that drywall is done is that you would drywall the ceiling first, then you would install the upper drywall panel and butt it right up against the ceiling, and then do the second panel below that one. Well, because I'm not drywalling the ceiling, I'm actually going in the reverse order of that. So I'm putting down the lower panel first and then setting the top panel on top of that. It's a little easier to install on the walls that way without a lift. That's now 1, 2, 3 walls done. I've got this 1 wall left. By the way, if you're doing any drywall work, this was my first time trying these DeWalt drywall screw setters, and I wish I had used these a long time ago when I was previously working on drywall because I kept over sinking the screws. This helped quite a bit. It's a pack of 4 of them for, I don't know, it was a couple of dollars. If I can find them online, I'll link them in the description. Okay, I'm gonna have to ask for your forgiveness one more time because I did not film very much of the finishing stages of the studio. I was just so ready to have it done. But the good news is that finally, after about a year of working on this project, the studio is finished. At least it's 99, 98% finished, but that's close enough. I'm calling it done. So before I show you more of the studio as it is now, let me first catch you back up to speed, because where I left off last time, I was in the process of finishing out the ceiling. So I was still doing the fabric and the wood slats up there. After I finished that, I moved on to doing the mud work on the drywall, which is something that I'm getting a little better at. There's definitely an art form to drywall mud, so it took a little bit of time, but I got through it. And then I moved on to priming the walls and painting the walls. And I was really hoping to get away with just 1 coat of paint, but because this is such a dark gray, going over that white primer, I did have to do 2 coats. After that is when I moved on to installing the flooring, which did not take very long at all because I went the cheap and easy route of using sheet vinyl. So I just got 1 roll of sheet vinyl. I found it on clearance at Lowe's, put that in an afternoon, and then I moved on to doing all of the trim work. So the baseboards, the trim around the windows, and the trim around the door. Once the trim was done, I moved on to making these sound panels, and I made a total of 4 of them. So I have 1 covering each of the windows, and then I have a large cloud panel hanging from the ceiling right above where my table is, which is where I record most of the dialogue for my videos. And I've always had an issue with my voice bouncing between this hard tabletop and the ceiling. So having a big sound panel over that helps a lot there. These sound panels that I have over the windows are serving multiple purposes. So they are, of course, dampening the sound within the studio, but they're also doing some soundproofing, so helping to block out some of that outside noise. They're also covering all the windows specifically because I wanted to, first of all, block out all outside light when I'm recording a video and have total control of my lighting. And these windows, because they're storage shed windows, they're not very well insulated. So having these panels over the windows are doing quite a bit of insulating as well. So these panels live up here most of the time. And then if I'm just doing some general work in the studio and I want to let in some natural light, I can just pull these off the window like so. This was my first time ever making sound panels, which is one of the reasons why I didn't record really any of the process, because I was kind of figuring it out myself. Now that I've made a few, let me know in the comments if you would like to see me make a full tutorial on how I made these, because I think I'm going to make 1 or 2 more and I can record that process if you're interested. But to give you just a quick overview, what I did is I built an outside frame using 1x4 common boards, the same boards that I put on the ceiling. I then covered the outsides and 1 face of the frame with this burlap fabric. I'll link the website down below. I can't remember the name of it, but it's an acoustic panel website, and they have this burlap for sale that is like a cheaper alternative to some of their higher end sound panel fabrics. So I did that. I then filled the inside of the panel with Rockwool Safe and Sound, which you can get at Lowe's or Home Depot. And then I covered the back sides of the panels with landscaping fabric. So it's the same fabric that I used on the ceiling. I just used 1 layer. And then for these panels that are covering the windows, I put an eye hook on that corner and on that corner, and I have some screws just run into the trim on the window here so that I can hang it up just like so. Also, I have not yet caulked or painted any of the trim in the whole studio. So that's why I say I'm like 98-99% done and not fully finished. The last step of the actual build of the studio was to install the air conditioner. So this is a mini split AC unit, and I was able to mount the inside unit and the outside unit, which is just outside of that wall right there. And then thankfully I have an uncle who works in HVAC, so he was able to come by, make all the final connections for me, get it up and running and operating properly. And this is something that I'm really excited about, because in the past I've always had to turn off the air conditioner when I was recording because it was so loud. And this one, it's not dead silent, but it is running right now, and I'm standing right next to it. So it's definitely quiet enough that I'll be able to leave it on most of the time when I'm recording. That's going to be a big help here in the Georgia summer heat. So with all of that done, it was time to officially move in, I guess you could say. And I'll quickly just go around the room and kind of show you what all I have in here. First of all, I'll start with the big husky tool chest. There actually are tools in here, but it's really all camera gear storage. So I have a battery charging space up here. Also, any camera gear that I grab and use frequently is sitting right up top. And then everything else is organized down into these drawers. Mostly organized, I would say. I also have a light here, a monitor mounted on the wall, and for the sake of time, I'm not going into specifics of what gear I'm using in here in this video. I am going to post a separate video over on my Gear Test Tech channel where I'll go into all of those specifics and all of those details. The other thing that I have are these wall-mounted stands back here, and I have two of those. So I have one for booming my audio above me, and then I have one for a top-down camera. And back here, this is all of the gear storage, which also serves as my background for the Gear Test Outdoors channel. And kind of the whole purpose in the design of this studio was to set it up with outdoor gear storage along this wall, so I can film in this direction for the Gear Test Outdoors channel, and then I can flip everything around and film in that direction for the Gear Test Tech channel or any other videos that I'm going to do. I still have some work to do with what will be the background there, so that's to be continued, but that's the plan. The table that I have here, it's the same one that I've been using for a few years now. It's a Husky sit-stand workbench, so it has a manual crank you can use to bring it up to standing height, which is what it's at right now, or you can drop it down to sit at the table if you'd prefer to do that. And then behind me over here is all the rest of the video gear storage. So if it's too large to fit in the tool chest, it goes over here. This is just a black wireframe rack. I have some miscellaneous things stored on that. And then over here, this is something that I wish I would have done a long time ago. I bought this for $60, I think it was, from either Lowe's or Home Depot. And I got it there because this is actually a lumber rack, which also means that I think it's rated to hold like 600 pounds, so it's very sturdy. And this is where I have all of my light stands and tripods stored. And this works so much better than what I used to do, which was just piling everything into a corner, leaning it up against each other. It was a big mess. Also, you might have noticed some camera gear just shoved up against that wall at the end. I'd just push that stuff out of the way for the time being, because that's the gear that would typically live right here where I'm standing, right in front of this table, because that's the gear that I use to film most of my videos. So my key light, my main tripod, that type of thing. And if you're interested in knowing more details about that, that's what I'm going to be discussing in my other video over on my other channel. So as soon as that video is published, I will have a link to it in the description. I'll also try to put a card up here, so you can check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, thank you so much for following along on this project, and I'm sorry it took me so long to get it done and so long to get this video published, but if you found the video helpful or at least entertaining, will you please give the video a like? It does help out the channel. Oh, and one thing I don't think I mentioned before is that these LED lights that I put in the ceiling are RGB, so I do have them set up so that I can say, "Alexa, turn the lights blue."
Okay.
I don't know if I'll ever actually use that in a video, but it's a cool thing to have.